Okay. No, thank you to all of those presenters. I was going to pick out some interesting points between it, but there are so many questions coming in that I think it's time's better spent on the questions. So firstly, I would say we're not going to get through all the questions that we've received already. So what we will try to do is email answers to as many of them as we can afterwards. But I will just start with the first question, which is, do major brands believe that using 100% recycled plastic will stop consumers throwing them away? And I'm going to bring in Tom first and then Charmaine.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, look, I suppose it's a good question. I think the ultimate objective here and what we need to bear in mind is what's the end goal here? What are we trying to do? And for us, as Coca-Cola HBC, the real objective here is to create a circular economy for packaging on the island, and to, I guess, embed reuse as a key principle within our own activities, but also within the activities of our consumers and how they view our packaging. So I think when we look at recycled PET, that has the lowest carbon footprint of all packaging materials. So straight away, there's an obvious benefit from a migration towards rPET. Now, there are a number of challenges arising from rPET, and some of them which I referenced earlier, in terms of the additional costs, in terms of the sourcing challenges that are there, and availability issues. But for us, it's a no-brainer as being the best packaging type available to us in the marketplace at the moment. It also obviously reduces the need for virgin plastic. So if we think about it, it's all about trying to create that circular flow of packaging and ensure that we can keep that loop going and continue to reuse that packaging. And I suppose I should say it needs to be done, well, we need to look at it in the context of DRS and what's coming from a deposit return scheme. But I think there is a job of work to be done to educate consumers around DRS, how DRS works, what the benefit of DRS as a model is, and how they can engage with it. So there's a requirement to shift, I guess, the consumer mindset from seeing packaging as waste to seeing packaging as a valuable commodity. And to our mind, that's where the opportunity lies here, and that's what rPET allows us to do.
Okay, just to pick up on the point about the material being thrown away. So the main lever in the DRS is that there's a big incentive then for the consumer to actually return the container for recycling. So currently, the materials we have that would be included in a DRS have maybe 70% recycling rate from curbside. So there's still 30% of material ending up either littered or in residual waste. So the current estimates for Northern Ireland are that's nearly 200 million items per year for Northern Ireland. So we would see a successful DRS scheme will actually be delivering on a big reduction on that material either being littered or thrown into residual waste.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next question is, if all companies move to 100% rPET, where will the supply come from? And I'll first go to Barry and then to Brona.
Okay, obviously the DRS presents an opportunity to channel that PET back into bottles. At the moment, PET, when it gets collected for recycling, can go into a number of different applications. Once a DRS is implemented, you've got the opportunity to close that loop and put that material straight back into the PET bottle. Also, obviously, with the DRS, you've got the opportunity to increase the amount of material that's being collected as well.
Thanks, Barry. And on to Brona.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember as well that PET is quite heavily used in other forms of packaging. It's in film, it's in tray as well, and there's a great opportunity to get it out of the tray stream back into bottle, into tray and whatever. But important not to lose sight as well that PET is in clothing, textile, carpet too, and there's going to be a big drive in the future to get recycled content back into those products, but also a good opportunity to mine into the waste from textiles and carpets to bring back into potentially food grade too. So it can come from a lot of sources, but it also is going to be put into an awful lot of sources again in the future.
Thank you,
I don't
Brona.
think needing some version input.
Okay, now the next question. Now, I'm going to ask Tom to start on this one. Tom, you probably don't remember this, but apparently in 1974, Coca-Cola commissioned life cycle analysis that showed refillables with a minimum of 8 refills were the lower carbon options than PET aluminium. So are there any plans to move back to refill models? And I'll bring you in first, Tom, then I'll get Michael in from another perspective, and finally Benjamin.
In 1974 is a bit before my time, Colin, but I'm impressed at the question. It seems to be very well researched. On refillables, I'd say it's definitely a significant part of our ambition going forward. It's a significant part of our overall pack mix at the moment. So about 9% of all the product we sell is in refillable form. And that comes mainly through our Freestyle solution, or indeed the fountain solution that everyone will be aware of. So there's a huge amount of innovation and investment in that space to see how do we continue to increase that 9% and make it an even more substantial part of our total pack mix over a period of time. And we do have significant ambitions for the rest of this year and into next year to look at trialing certain solutions in certain channels and formats to see how that might work. So I suppose a long way of answering the question to say, yes, it remains a key part of our overall strategy going forward, and we're looking to invest more in that space in the years ahead.
Thank you, Tom. Now on to Michael.
Hi, Colin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I wasn't around for 74 either, by the way, just get that out there at the start. This is almost like let's back to the future, you know, let's go back to putting everything in glass jars and go round and round. There's two core problems, and it's kind of taking a balanced scorecard approach. We need to watch food safety and integrity carefully. We've made huge advances in shelf life and integrity, and we mustn't go backwards on those with going round and round on packaging. We also need to watch the energy footprint, the CO2 footprint of producing glass and transporting it, which is heavy, as an example, doesn't hold up well to the light of day. I think a bigger issue than possibly this concept of going round is how do we stop plastic being dead-ended so it's a one-way trip? Because one of the big problems for the industry at the minute is the complexity. In our packaging group, which CCHBC are great supporters of, and so are CAFRE, we've noted how complex the packaging mix is. And by that I mean films are typically plastic A plus B, and then the next film is plastic A plus plastic C, and then the next film is plastic A plus C with a bit of E. And those are done on an economic basis. We need to get to the place where the industry is simplified down and the choices are simplified. And unfortunately, one of the upshots of that will be cost, and it will add cost to the consumer, but it will dramatically improve the recyclability position going forward. Because in talking to the people at the sharp end who actually are trying to recycle waste from households, they are having great difficulty with the mix and desegregating the mix to become effective.
Thank you very much, Michael. And we'll now get a perspective from Benjamin on what the consumer actually wants in relation to refills.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. In terms of the consumer feedback we've had, obviously prior to the pandemic, we saw a lot of activity, and consumers are increasingly sort of saying, yes, this is a solution that we want to include as part of our shop. And I think that that was being facilitated. We saw a large number of the big retailers were launching sort of trials of in-store refill. We've got brands as well launching trials, the likes of Nestle in food, Danone, for example, in dairy, but also across obviously the beauty and personal care space as well. And that volume of activity is important. I think as a solution, it's not going to be enough if of my entire shopping list, I can pop into a supermarket and one of those items I can refill. It's got to be across enough of my shopping list to make it a normalized activity. But obviously, COVID came along, and firstly, what we're hearing from consumers is that has caused concern around the hygienic sort of quality of open source products in store, as it were, which is how a lot of refilling food is provided. Now, there's technical ways around that in terms of sort of hands-off refill and vending machine refill that can deal with that, but that technology is not necessarily available. So what we've seen is a big sort of push from consumers, followed by maybe a little bit of a step back during the pandemic. But I think given that weight of desire prior, as we emerge and return to the next normal, I think that will come back again, and I don't think refill will go away. I think it will find a place. But at the moment, realistically, what we've got is we're stuck in the trial phase. Everything I see is sort of a trial of a refill sort of aisle in store. It's a trial of a refill vending machine by a brand. I've not seen the level of commitment to actually taking this forward to make it a normalized part of people's shop. So I think watch this space, and I still think that it's going to happen, but I think that hygiene trumps at the moment, and therefore that's stalled the activity we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. Yeah, I think it's important to start building back better in sustainability, because it certainly has taken a hit during the pandemic for some very good reasons, but we definitely need to get back to where we were and beyond. Okay, now to the next question. So what plans do the panel feel government has to fulfill its obligation to create or incentivize creation via private investment of recycling infrastructure to create a fully circular economy? And I'm going to go to Charmaine from a central government perspective, and then Tim from a local government perspective.
So under the proposals that have been out for EPR on packaging, what we would see there is a shift into a more homogenized waste streams in some of the particularly plastic packaging that's going onto the market. There's going to be a system of modulated fees, so producers will be paying a higher fee for less recyclable material, and obviously then being incentivized to put on more recyclable material onto the market. There's going to be clearer labeling as well for consumers, so that we would hope there'd be less contamination in curbside recycling as well. And all of these things should build into having a more resource available. We know that waste processors in Northern Ireland are already looking for opportunities of separating out and getting ready for collections of films and flexibles in the future, looking for end markets for those. So a lot of this will be driven by the sector as well, but there are some big policy changes coming through. Well, we're analysing consultation responses at the minute for EPR on packaging, but the hope would be that a lot of those big changes, combined with other levers like the packaging and the plastic tax, are gonna cause a shift in the waste hierarchy, particularly for plastic packaging. Is that okay, Colin? Do you want?
And over to Tim now.
Thanks, Colin. Yes, I was one of those people who spent long hours responding to both the extended producer responsibility and deposit return scheme consultations. In fact, it's one of the first times in a long time I've done overnighters to get the responses in. There is fundamental change coming. I'm from the waste sector, so I'm coming from a slightly different tack on this. And I also sit on the advisory committee on packaging. So interesting twin hatting going on here in terms of how waste is finally being brought in from the cold into discussions around material capture and material recovery. And I think there's some really, really key issues here. Those two schemes, EPR and DRS, are going to change how waste is managed across these islands, and it's part of the bigger circular economy package. That revolution, as Pierre said, needs to be conveyed to the public, because there is a massive, massive change coming, and change in terms of the economics of waste and resources and how they're managed. There's also a fundamental shift needed in terms of how we collaborate across the packaging chain. And to date, we have seen it from the perspective of not great degrees of collaboration. So there is a lot more money moving into the packaging chain now than before. So from a council perspective, from a waste collection perspective, the issue is going to be, how can we provide better consistency, better simplicity for the public, better simplicity from yourselves, so that we collect the right stuff to be recovered and reused. The concern is there's a lack of investment in the sector. The concern is there's a lack of infrastructure to process these materials. The concern is that there is not a clear roadmap required as to just where these facilities are, how many are there, what kind of infrastructure should they be building. And the time frame for this, so 2022, 2023, 24, sorry, is massively tight in terms of the entire architecture administrative around this. I mean, it's a great opportunity as a sector. We're absolutely up for this, but the issue of how we then have the funding mechanism, it's not something within our gift as waste collectors. Within waste treatment, there's a concern about investing heavily into the collection, into the processing arrangements until we've got certainty as to who wants what, where and when and in what volumes. And if that's going to change on us, are we going to make that investment? So there is a much greater conversation to be had throughout the supply chain, which is why conversations like this are imperative to find out, are the hybrid plastics going to maintain? You know, as Michael was saying, what mix of plastics are going to be there? Is there some way we need to be choice editing? And I know of a couple of the packaging companies now that are beginning to edit out certain grades of plastic or certain material types. Does that need to be mandated by government to say, for example, we'll just not produce polystyrene? Yeah, it's a great material, but we're just not going to use it anymore because there are problems with regards to the cost equation to make it efficient. So there is a lot in this, but it has to start with proper conversations, and it has to be done at pace so that we can then begin to broadcast that to the public and bring them into this place as well. I'll not talk about the political sphere because I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to speak about that in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Now for the next question is, can we replace compostable films as a best alternative for the flexible film market? And I think I'm going to ask Barry and Brona to input into this one. So Barry first.
There's a lot of thought that needs to be given to the infrastructure that we're going to need, as Tim has already outlined. We're trying to, as a sector, through initiatives like CFlex that I mentioned as part of the presentation, make sure that the structures that are placed on the market are simplified to make it easier. Might surprise people to realize that out of the film sector, roughly 80% of materials are single polymer type structures. So, you know, the challenge is, and I showed an illustration of where changes are happening to make it easier. The Amcor example, where they moved away from a PET aluminium and PP structure to a PP structure. So change is happening. And coming back to Tim's point in terms of infrastructure and what materials, and in particular compostables, if you're going to place compostables on the market, they've got to be streamed in a way that they don't interfere with the other streams of recyclable films that you are trying to collect. So that means thought has to be given to what stream to put those compostables in. So if you put those compostables into the stream associated with food, for example, then if you then send that to an anaerobic digester, that's only going to work if you've got a pre-treatment facility that can handle those compostable films at that facility. And most don't have that. So we have to build out, as Tim was saying, a well thought out system of waste management. And we've got a super opportunity to do this as part of this EPR change. And also DRS. Just think of all the material that a DRS will take out of the collection system, and think of the revolution that that will entail for the waste management sector. When you combine that with all the new materials that are going to be added in, whether it's aerosols, whether it's drinks cartons, whether it's films and flexibles, there does need to be a really in-depth discussion around what that future landscape is going to look like. And for compostables, that will need its own dedicated collection structure and infrastructure to be built around that.
Thank you, Barry.
Yes, I totally agree with everything Barry's saying. Compostables are a real interest of mine, and I think possibly step back for people to realise that compostables can come from a bio-based source, but they also can be coming from a petrochemical-based source. So simply to replace the material with a compostable material doesn't necessarily mean that you've gone bio and green on it. You still may be using those fossil sources. Compostables, definitely, if we're going to put more compostables on the market, we need to build the infrastructure for their end of life. We need to design them with that end of life in mind. And for me, compostables will only ever be a niche material. They currently only will fill about 1%, maybe less than 1% of our current packaging needs. So we're far way off from having compostables as a mainstream packaging material. And if anything, we do run a risk if we knee-jerk replaced compostables that we are removing really valuable recyclable materials from the recycling stream, when those are extremely valuable materials. We need to focus on getting those recyclable polymers back into packaging before knee-jerk changing to compostables. So we're far off from being able to replace wholeheartedly with compostables, and never really should be.
Thank you very much, Brona. Yeah, and I think I will add there, we also have to be careful of the whole contamination side of things, with a small number of compostables going into a mainly recyclable waste stream. Okay, so now the next question is, are there any recyclable sachets like those used in energy gels? And I'm going to bring in Benjamin first on this one, because he had mentioned a couple of things in his presentation. And then we will have just Brona to hear if there's any work been done in Queens on the matter. So Benjamin?
Yeah, we've heard again and again from most of our speakers the challenges with recycling flexibles. And I mean, from a global perspective, yes, I've seen sachets making claims about being recyclable, but we have a fairly sort of open legislations in many countries as to what claims you can make. And I see some really what I would say dubious claims around recyclability when it comes to flexibles in many markets, even those developed markets like the US, in particular the US, where they seem to be quite happy to stick sustainable packaging claims on, which are fairly open and don't explain what they mean, like sort of generally sustainable or again recyclable when it comes to flexibles, when that might technically be true in that case, but there's no way of testing that because there's no collection facility for flexibles in that market. So I think the focus here shouldn't be on whether they exist out there. I think, as we've heard from already, the focus is getting that sort of behind the scenes streams ready to collect them, to make sure that that's commercially viable, to make sure that the consumers have access to the ability to stick those into their curbside recycling, because at the end of the day, that's the only place that consumers are going to stick their flexible sachets if we want them to recycle. There are some great organizations out there that will collect hard to recycle plastics, and I'm not going to name them because I don't want to associate them with a negative thing, but at the end of the day, they're not a solution that works for consumers. Consumers, when they see recyclable, what that means in their head is, can I stick it in that one of two choices I've got, landfill bin, recycle bin? That's what we need to work with. That's the framework we need to deliver a solution around.
Thank you, Benjamin. And now on to Brona.
Yeah, I think in all those multi-layer structures, there's massive challenges. And currently, we do some work in Queens on recycling multi-layer structures, food packaging multi-layer structures. A lot of the time, we can downcycle them into lower level products. It's hard to get them back into food grade. And there's a massive challenge to try and get that food grade content back in the 30% tax that's coming our way. Essentially, my opinion on it is, if it's a multi-layer structure, it's going to be super difficult to do something with, and try to get it back to a monolayer material where possible. And at the minute, most materials are being downgraded. We talk to and work with bodies like CFlex as well, and we are looking at, how much of multi-layer structures can possibly go into, say, the polyolefin streams to retain recyclability with those. And it's extremely challenging, and the work is only really just starting, but it's extremely challenging to get multi-layer content back into the PE or the PP recycling stream. Very challenging.
Thank you, Brona. And we have half an hour left on the event, so I'm going to now move through the questions a bit quicker and only ask one person for an answer. So the first one is, with all the legislation changing over the next 24 months, are CAFRE planning to add in extra resource to support NI companies navigate through this period? And Philip, going to answer that?
Okay. Well, DEFRA is, DERA is working closely with the industry. We do our best to support Northern Ireland companies to sort of navigate and adapt to all the changes and innovate for the period ahead. And we're pleased that very many graduates from the CAFRE food education programs develop an interest and start a career in packaging. That's something we're very proud of. And then these new entrants go to the industry and contribute to the success of local companies as our range of packaging courses continue to allow those working in this sector to develop the skills. We bring back people back in to our technology labs to train them up, and they've had their initial training, but they come back again and again as well, and they get knowledge that's relevant to the latest develops in packaging. So we will continue to do that. That's our aim, to continue to support the industry.
Thank you, Philip. Now, the next question is for Charmaine, and it's, are there any moves to look at changing the wording on labels to simply say recycle, which means that the product or the plastic is able to be recycled?
Yeah, so in the EPR proposals for packaging, that's one of the things that consumers may actually notice of everything that's going to come, is that one of the options has been to just put a very binary system of labelling on packaging, either do or do not recycle. Very clear, streamlined labelling across the UK. The consultation closed on the 4th of June, but we've had very, very positive feedback from stakeholders throughout on just going to a very, very simple binary model of labelling. No more of this widely recycled, but nobody knows where, and you can't put it in curbside and so there's a big appetite from the public to have things simplified. And we need straightforward consumer messaging to just get the right stuff into people's curbside for recycling. So that will be a big change, and probably one of the few things people will notice. That's proposed from about 2025, 26, I think.
Great, thank you, Charmaine. Now, the next question is, does flexible film need to be mono for chemical recycling, or can laminate be recycled? And Barry, do you want to take this one?
Yes, happy to take that. I mean, there are different technologies available for non-mechanical recycling, and the industry is, as it's developing, is looking at the ideal streams to give the necessary quality to meet the food contact applications and to make this whole system circular. And I would say some are willing to take those mixed polymer structures. Some are willing to even, sort of take those structures that are metallized and take them back into that, back into the system. Others are preferring to take and focus on a particular group of polymers. So some of them are focusing on just mixed polyolefins, for example. So it's a mixed bag depending on the technology that's been used and depending on the business model. But there is certainly the opportunity. Having said that, I think what we will continue to see, as has already been touched on, further simplification in the palette of materials, because innovations are happening that are allowing that.
Thank you very much, Barry. And now this next question is for Tim Walker. So what are the plans for local councils in Northern Ireland in terms of collection of plastics to get recycled and to avoid the film going to landfill?
Well, this is a crucial issue, and thanks for that question, Colin. Yeah, Northern Ireland's had a great success with plastics. I mean, it's kept it very simple in terms of local councils. I mean, it's primarily HDPE and PET. They're really two key ones that are being targeted, using very simple messaging around the idea of any plastic bottles you use in your kitchen or your bathroom. Please put them out for recycling in your box or your bin. Moving on to the next stage is going to be much more problematic. And certainly when we start looking at things like plastic film, there's going to be real problems around that for 2027, because there's a lack of infrastructure in Northern Ireland to deal with plastic film of a mixed nature. But in terms of the real thing that councils are grappling with, which is very apparent at the minute in England, around consistency. And there was a consultation in Northern Ireland last year around how to improve the nature of wastes collected from household and household-like premises. And there is this continual pressure between sort of a Janus-like impression. Are we looking to make it easier for the council, for the public, and the ratepayers, and the householders, and the politicians to sell? Or are we a supplier to the industry? Because if we're looking at the simple one of making it easy for the householder and chasing simple targets, and those are the percentage points, then it's all about quantity. If we're feeding the industry as a supply chain supplier, we're looking at quality. And those two do not sit easily together. And so there is this tension in the sector at the minute between quality versus quantity. It's been there for years, but it's been brought out into stark relief. And one of the ministers in London a couple of years ago, Rory Stewart, tried to get RAP to simplify this to about 5 different models. It's out again for consultation in England at the minute. It's due to close. Actually, it may have closed now. I think it may be closing in early July. And it's not applicable to ourselves. But that issue is key. How do councils collect stuff easily, and is it the right stuff? It's not been squared, that circle, yet. And the other thing is, from a council perspective, it's not just about the plastics that we collect within the recyclables. It's also the plastics that could be collected through the residual waste bin, the black bin, the grey bin, and how can we recover some of those if the market is right? What front-end investment is needed in advance of being treated? The worst thing in the world is send this stuff to landfill, because landfill is uncontrolled, the mix of materials going in is contaminated, it's going to gradually degrade. And that's why I was really pleased to see Pierre's slide about the incineration capacity, which is a temporary, a transition technology between where we are now with a wasteful society towards where we need to be in a generation in a circular economy type society. But we need to invest in infrastructure, going back to that point I made earlier on. And there has been a lack of investment in infrastructure and a lack of appreciation at governmental and political level that there is a lack of infrastructure dealing with these different material types. I'll go on, but I won't, because I could hobby horse on this for quite some time.
Thank you, Tim. Now the next question is on the deposit and return scheme, so it'll be for Charmaine, and it is, will all non-returned funds be ring-fenced to tackle litter?
So we have consultation questions on this, and there's obviously the fee that people pay on their bottle comes straight back to them. So in theory, 100% return, you get net. There's no movement, money moving through the system, but obviously there's going to be a certain proportion of unredeemed deposits. So the preference has been, and this is what we've consulted on, whether that part funds the whole system. And that could be also education, litter, and all of those aspects as well. So we haven't analysed all the responses to consultation. It's only just closed a week or so ago, but that is one of the options. There's a critical point there where you want the deposit level to be high enough to incentivise people to return their bottle, but not so high that there ends up being a lot of money sloshing around the system as a surplus. So there's a lot to be looked at within that. The other aspect on litter is, I mean, with the deposit return scheme, we're going to see a big increase in recycling, less litter on the streets. There's a saving of costs to mainly councils, road service and others who clear up our mess all the time. But also in EPR, there's a big fund there for litter as well. That would be paid by producers. So for Northern Ireland, I think that comes out as about, I think 6 million. That also would be transferred over to councils or other authorities for litter management as well. So I think the real lever with the deposit return scheme is that there should just be less littered items because they should be being returned for a redemption, so that we are saving just naturally from that happening.
Thank you, Charmaine. So the next question is for Philip. How much will HMRC make from the plastic tax?
Okay, I don't have an answer for that directly. I don't know the amount, but I can tell you that that was not the original intention of the scheme. It's not seen as a revenue gathering tax. It's actually supposed to drive the creation of recycling infrastructure, and that touches on some of the points that were raised earlier about investment and so on, because the way of getting investment in this case is avoiding the tax, saving that tax. That can be your investment. Rather than giving it to the taxman, you give it to the recycling industry to build that infrastructure. So I think As I said, I don't have a figure for it, although again, I do believe HMRC are going to be at a future event and we'll maybe have some actual figures for that. But as I say, that's not the intent of the tax in the first place.
Thank you, Philip. And now I'm going to ask Pierre a question here. So the question is, are consumers focusing on environmental impacts of packaging rather than their own consumption habits, e.g. air travel and driving SUVs, when the focus on environmental impacts of packaging should be the responsibility of big corporations?
That's a very long-winded question.
Yeah, that was me paraphrasing it as well, Pierre.
I'll try and break it down. So if one looks across from a global perspective, I think the answer is no, not really. Not enough is being done by the consumers to focus in the areas that a lot of the environmentalists are focusing on. And certainly us in the packaging industry, and certainly the World Packaging Organization, so much more can be done. Even across member countries, there is focus in particular areas. When I say particular areas, I'm talking regions, for example, across Southeast Asia. A lot more can be done. The lack of infrastructure in those areas. We're doing a lot of work with the United Nations in some of those countries. Certainly up in your part of the world, up in Europe, it's going well, and you look at the systems that you guys are using, certainly across the UK and the greater EU areas, then it's good. If one looks into South America, we've got a lot of problems in that region. And then Africa is a mammoth task. So if you answer that question from a global perspective, then it's a lot. Let's be positive and say a lot more could be done and a lot more should be done. But I think what's happening is folk are concentrating in their own backyards and not looking at the bigger picture.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. And I was so busy listening to you, I have now lost my place, which I suppose is a good sign. So, right, now the next question is, would consumers take a shorter shelf life on products for a more sustainable form of packaging? And I'm going to go to Michael for this one.
No. The whole marketplace has been moving to longer and longer shelf lives, and that's to reduce food waste. That's really the primary driver. Yes, you can shorten shelf life, but you will drive up food waste. And just on some of the previous comments, I'd make the following. For policymakers to try to encourage collaborative working across the chains, because some of the policies that have been introduced have been fairly blunt instrument, and they tend to focus on one bit of the chain that in theory can pay. But for example, in a global macro sense with food packaging, the councils are at the front line. They're the ones who have to try and get the product back from the bin and back into the system. And I think we've been disingenuous with consumers and some of the messaging that's out there. And I don't mean we, the food industry, I mean we, the food industry, the recyclers and government. Bread bags, for example, all state fully recyclable, none are, nor have been. So we've got some real things that we need to do to make this work a lot better than it does. And I listening to speakers, I kind of think that's consensus view.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And I would actually be interested to hear a bit from Benjamin on this too, in terms of the sort of the global perspective on consumers.
Sorry, could you remind me the question?
It's whether consumers would accept shorter dated
shorter shelf life. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen is essentially I'd agree completely with Michael that the short answer is no. And it's not just because of food waste, because although consumers are aware of food waste, I think it also comes down to changing shopper behaviour. If you look at kind of the massive shift to e-commerce, partly driven by the pandemic or accelerated more by the pandemic, that changes kind of the things that you're thinking about in terms of freshness, and also in terms of that changing shopper habit from shopping every day. I mean, we don't go to work every day and pop into the supermarket on our way home to buy what we need for that evening. We're now doing more targeted shopping. We're shopping once a week. And again, that starts to sort of focus your mind on, well, is this going to last me? So we're seeing consumers definitely responding in terms of looking or considering shelf life, or in terms of wanting a longer shelf life in a way that we didn't see previously. So when we talk to consumers about shelf life, generally they're looking for longer shelf life. They're considering it in a way they weren't before. That also goes to that sort of stockpiling mentality, and we saw it at the beginning of the pandemic very sort of starkly when we had sort of shelf outages because everybody was stocking up. That hasn't sort of happened again, but when we talk to consumers, they still have this mentality of I want the security of knowing that I've got something in my cupboard that will last me for a period that in a way that we didn't see prior to the pandemic. And again, that speaks to longer shelf life. So no, I think if it's sort of a difference between 2 years and a year and a half on the shelf life, then again there's some flexibility there. But generally, what we're seeing from consumers is that fresh is best is probably still there, but actually alongside that is, and I still want something that I know is going to be good quality, high nutrition, and I can go to it in the cupboard at any time and know that I've got something that reassures my need for food security. So no, I would agree with Michael.
Great, thank you very much. Now this next question is specifically directed at Tom, and it's, why have you changed to board packaging to hold multi-pack cans together? Is it a response to consumer demand, or is it based on a life cycle analysis?
I think the answer to that question comes in the form of the conversation and debate that's been had on this call for the last 40 minutes or so around soft plastics and the ability to recycle or otherwise. Yeah, we looked at that decision a couple of years ago, and the basis of the decision was that our analysis was that the soft plastic wrap that we were using on our multi-pack can format was difficult to recycle. And what we wanted to do was make it as easy as possible for our consumers to make the right decision about how to dispose of the packaging and how to make sure that the packaging was reused and recycled appropriately and in the best way possible. That was the main motivator and driver behind our decision. It was also supplemented by the fact that consumers have a preference for card, and that was clear from the research we did with our consumers. When we asked them the direct question, which would they prefer, it was a very clear preference for card. And as we rolled out the card solution via what we call Q-Clip on our smaller multi-pack cans and Q-Flex, which is the bigger cardboard packaging on our multi-pack cans, the response has been really positive from consumers. They think it looks better, they think it works better, they think it's eminently more recyclable, and indeed their analysis is probably correct in the greater scheme of things. So we're in no doubt that card was the right choice. It also removes about 500 tons of soft plastics from our supply chain annually, which I think is a good news story as well. And until such a time as we're in a place where soft plastics are easily recycled and we can keep that circular economy going and that circular flow of packaging in the system, card will probably remain the choice for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Now the next question I'm going to direct to Pierre, and it's another two-step question. So from a consumer perspective, is foil packaging perceived as more environmentally friendly? And is it actually more environmentally friendly?
Did you say foil, Colin?
Yeah, foil packaging. So the various types of foil packaging.
Yeah, good question. I think there's certainly a perception that it is a very environmentally friendly type of material. Unfortunately, it's price sensitive, so not used to the extent that one could potentially use it. And in many cases, it's been replaced by various polymer-based materials. And certainly, and the second part, yes, I mean, it's certainly very recyclable, as long as you keep it as direct aluminium foil and you haven't laminated it to something else. then it's an ideal formula. Yeah, I mean, it'd be wonderful if it was cheaper and used more extensively around the world, for sure. And it's got very high barrier properties over certain thicknesses.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have a question here from a recent graduate from CAFRE, who they are currently searching for a job in the packaging industry, so I wish them luck. They say that they feel consumer packaging education is key to achieving packaging targets. So should more of the big brands increase advertising on their packs? And I assume that means education type advertising. And what is the best way? And I think I'll ask Benjamin this one.
Yeah, I mean, clarity for consumers is key in terms of getting them on board and getting them to undertake the actions that we're all expecting them to undertake in order to sort of do the right thing, whether that be composting or putting it into the recycle bin, or choosing a product that has a lower carbon footprint. But I would be reticent to sort of say that it's a responsibility of brands to do that, because brands have a responsibility to their shareholders. They also, I mean, have to take responsibility for the various strategies that they come up with, which may be different from other brands, and therefore to sort of say it's their responsibility to then be the sole communicator of how consumers understand these various sometimes very difficult supply chains, very difficult sort of life cycle analysis to come up with this pack is better than that pack conclusion in the mind of the consumer, I think is difficult. So I think there has to be, whilst strong, we're seeing strong leadership from brands. I think in terms of the education, I would say, you know, governments and the like have a clear role to play it through schools, through educating the younger consumers as to giving them the grounding, giving them the background, the basic understanding of material cycles, of where things come from, where they go to, so that when there is something on pack, they feel confident in understanding it, feel confident in making a judgment, and feel confident in, like I say, undertaking the action that we require them to do to fulfill this virtual circle, to fulfill the circular economy. So yes, I think that we're already seeing brands taking a strong leadership role. We're already seeing brands taking a shot in terms of the action and communication. But in terms of responsibility, I wouldn't say they should shoulder it. I would say it's responsibility of us all, but particularly in education, of making sure that people understand the information they're being given.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to just give one more question, and I'm going to put this over to Tim with his particular interest, but it's a bit of a minefield, so Tim, I'll ask you for part of it only. So is it financially sensible to build infrastructure for compostable whenever we have such a small percentage? Would it be better to focus on incineration or other to deal with the remaining 99%? I'm assuming here they mean compostable packaging, as opposed to, because we already do have a facility for composting food waste, etc. And then Tim will have some further views maybe on incineration, etc. So over to you, Tim.
Well, I think in terms of the principles of the circular economy, ideally you're looking to espouse three particular elements. The first of which is stop pollution and to prevent waste. The second of which is making stuff last for as long as possible. And the third of which is how to replenish nature. So the idea of taking a material that could be returned or composted to effectively preempt it by incineration is not wise. I would suggest that really we should be looking at whatever prospects possible to develop packaging that can be composted through either anaerobic digestion or through aerobic composting. And that incineration should be reserved for those materials, those hybrid materials that really are not fit for recovery any other way. And for contaminated materials, or when there's a collapse in the marketplace, which is a further item which is often not considered when there is, I mean, we are talking about commodities and materials ultimately, and there is the ebb and flow of supply, and things like paper becomes very difficult to recycle after about 6 months because the ink becomes ingrained in it. What do you do with that when you're clearing out your loft with all the, or your attic with all the newspapers you've wrapped everything in for years or decades? It's not really easy to recycle that. So ultimately, incineration has a role to play. It's only a temporary role to play as we transition towards better material management in the whole supply chain. and therefore I would think that actually there should be compostables and there should be suitable facilities invested, developed to compost those arrangements.
Thank you very much, Tim. And just before, I'm going to just move over to Pierre in a second, but I'm conscious that the only person we didn't hear from today was Kieran McCartan from Invest Northern Ireland. So I was wondering if you wanted to add anything, Kieran, before we close.
Yeah, it's just to say there is support available. There's a lot of challenges to be tackled there across the companies and the sectors. And within Invest NI, we have R&D support that can help companies to either redevelop their packaging, whether it's for shelf life or lightweighting. And if there's any support needed, you can get in touch with Invest and we'll be happy to talk.
Thank you very much, Kieran. And Pierre, I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit more about the role of the World Packaging Organization, as we don't know a lot about it in Northern Ireland at the minute, and it's certainly something we're interested in, and I believe CAFRE are going to join it shortly. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, and I'd also invite you to maybe close the event, because you're very welcome and we're very thankful for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Colin, and thanks to all the listeners as well. And wonderful to be in Belfast, although not physically. Maybe one day I'll make the trip to Northern Ireland. Yes, the answer is CAFRE is about to join the WPO, the World Packaging Organization, which is a 62 country member organization. And it's by country, it's not by individual. So, and there are various formats of membership. So there's only one full member per country, and the others are affiliate members. And so IOM3 is the member from United Kingdom. And it's been going on since 1963, formed originally in Japan. And the main focus of the organization is to foster relationship in packaging between countries. And we also find that across the world, there's such a varying degree of suitability of packaging. Now, I say it with reservation, but I think in Europe, you have a very high standard of packaging, and that's great. But you also have to spare thought for countries that are less fortunate, and there are many of them across the world. And the organization strives to bring those countries into the fold to be able to get them onto the same level of suitability, especially in the food and pharmaceutical sector, to ensure that they have the shelf life that we enjoy in a developed world. And so there's a lot of education happening across the world all the time. Right now we've got teams in a number of developing countries where we go in and focus on a particular area. So it might be focusing on the apple industry in Pakistan, for example, because that sector's had very little help in relation to the technologies that are available in the developed world. So to be able to do this, there's a lot of humanitarian type work and a lot of volunteering type work, because the majority of the folk in the organization have got their own private jobs, and they're doing this other work on the side. We are trying to change that to some degree so that we can have more suitability in terms of infrastructure to get to these areas that require the help. And at the same time, we don't lose sight of striving to improve packaging across the world all the time. And so one of the things we do is we have what we call the World Stars in Packaging every year, which took place about 2 weeks ago, virtually, obviously. And this brings out the best and in packaging, but certainly helps to ensure that year on year in every possible sector, be it pharmaceutical, be it food, be it transit, whatever it might be, is that the packaging is recognized in front of a team of judges, a team of over 50 judges, judging those various facts that are submitted every year. And that certainly drives the will and the focus on improving material structures, improving suitability, and again, you know, we ensure that we, in fact, in a developed country, might be over-engineered for a developing country. So you've got to see it in the context. A fact that would never win in Europe might win in a country that has struggled in the packaging fraternity. And I referred to certain countries, for example, in Africa. And so you have to see it in that context. But we have a number of relationships with various organizations, global organizations, one of them being the United Nations through UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and we partner with them in a number of projects right across the world, predominantly in developing countries. So because in the developed world, you know, those countries are fine. It is pointless in trying to do things that they're already doing. There's no point in that. But we do drive for excellency in those particular countries. So I think that sort of gives a snapshot of what we're trying to do across the world. But it is, and then of course we want a very, very strong network, which is fantastic. And this is something that we hear more and more from members joining, is the fact that someone in, for example, in Ireland, or sorry, in Northern Ireland, may have a problem, and within 24 hours we push that across our network across the world, and the problem gets solved in, you know, within 24 hours. Now that is not possible, you know, sitting in your own office, wherever you might be. You know, how do you network if you don't have this sort of scenario happening? So, and then of course trade and industry. We work a lot with various governments around the world in the trade and industry sector, and helping again countries that are trying to get into another country in terms of trade. We have again the network to be able to do that. So I think it'd be wonderful to see CAFRA join, and the relationship that we've developed in the short space of time is fantastic, and I can see it only going from strength to strength. And you know, there's still a number of European countries that are not part of the WPO, and we would certainly like them to become part of the WPO. We'd like that 62 member countries to be 102 countries. That'd be fantastic. So I think it gives a fair overview of the WPO.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. And thanks to all our panelists, and especially thanks to everybody who joined. And like I say, please do fill in the questionnaire afterwards so we can keep improving these events. And I hope to see you all again soon. So thanks everyone, and have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.